The salvage ship Nightshade drifted silently through the debris field, its sensors probing the twisted metal remains of what had once been a mighty vessel. Nova Blackwood stood at the viewport, her dark eyes reflecting the ghostly dance of starlight on shattered hull plates. She'd been tracking this wreck for months, following whispers and rumors across the outer rim. Something about this ancient ship called to her, like a song heard in a half-remembered dream. Peculiar energy signature detected in Section 7, announced Pulse, her ship's AI companion. Pattern matches no known configuration in database. Nova adjusted her worn leather jacket, checking the charge on her plasma cutter. Plot me a course, Pulse. Let's see what secrets this old girl's keeping. The Nightshade threaded its way through the debris, Nova expertly piloting between jagged fragments of what must have been a massive vessel. As she drew closer to the energy signature, her instruments began picking up more unusual readings. Warning, Pulse chimed. Detecting active cryogenic systems. Power source unknown. Nova's heart quickened. Active systems in a wreck this old? Impossible. Yet the readings were clear as starlight. She guided her ship to a relatively intact section of the derelict, extending the docking umbilical with practiced ease. The magnetic seals engaged with a dull thump that resonated through the hull. Nova checked her environment suit one final time, making sure her oxygen reserves were full. Keep the engines hot, Pulse. If anything feels wrong, you pull us out. Understood? Acknowledged, Nova. Please exercise caution. The airlock cycled, and Nova stepped into the ancient vessel. Her boots magnetized to the deck as she moved through the zero-gravity environment, her helmet lights illuminating corridors that hadn't seen human presence in centuries. The architecture was unlike anything she'd encountered before, organic curves merged with crystalline structures in ways that defied conventional engineering. As she followed her scanner deeper into the wreck, the energy signature grew stronger. The air grew colder, frost forming on her visor despite her suit's thermal regulators. She rounded a corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Before her stood a massive chamber, its walls lined with cryogenic pods. Most were dark and empty, their contents long since lost to time. But one pod still pulsed with a soft, blue light. And through its frosted surface, Nova could make out a massive form. Pulse, are you seeing this? She whispered, approaching the active pod carefully. Affirmative. Bioreadings indicate presence of living organism. Caution advised. Nova wiped away some of the frost with her gloved hand and gasped. Inside the pod was what appeared to be a bear, but unlike any bear she'd ever seen. Its fur was a deep midnight blue, shot through with patterns that seemed to shift and move like starlight. More striking were the cybernetic augmentations visible through the fur, elegant silver implants that seemed to be part of the creature's very being. As she studied the pod's control panel, she noticed markings in an ancient script. Her augmented reality display worked to translate, Ranther, Guardian of the Third Sphere. Warning, Class Alpha Containment Protocol. Pulse, begin data recovery from the pod systems. I want to know everything about our sleeping friend here. As her AI worked, Nova noticed something else, marks on the pod's interior. Claw marks. This wasn't a preservation chamber. It was a prison. The pod systems suddenly hummed to life, responding to her presence. The creature's vital signs began to spike. Through the frost-covered glass, Nova saw its eyes open, ancient, intelligent eyes that glowed with an inner light. Nova, Pulse's voice held an unusual note of urgency. I'm detecting multiple ships entering the debris field. Hegemony signatures confirmed. Nova cursed under her breath. The hegemony, the oppressive force that ruled the inner systems, must have been tracking her. Or worse, they'd known about this place all along. She made a decision then, one that would change the course of her life and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. Pulse, begin emergency pod detachment sequence. We're taking our new friend with us. Nova, the risks of transporting an unknown entity dash. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards, Nova cut in, already working to secure the pod for transport. And something tells me our friend here has been imprisoned long enough. As she worked, she could feel those ancient eyes watching her. There was intelligence there, and something more, a longing for freedom that resonated with her own rebellious spirit. The first explosions rocked the derelict as hegemony ships began their attack. Nova worked faster, her hands flying over the controls as she integrated the pod systems with her ship's power grid. "Hold on, big guy," she muttered. "Your long sleep's about to end." The pod finally disconnected from its moorings with a hiss of escaping gas. Nova's magnetic tethers caught it before it could drift away. "Pulse, get ready for emergency extraction. We're about to have company." As she guided the pod through the wreck's corridors, Nova could hear the sound of boarding parties cutting through the hull behind her. The race was on, and she had no intention of losing her prize to the hegemony's thugs. She reached the airlock just as the first plasma bolts began flying past her head. The pod's mass made maneuvering difficult, but Nova hadn't survived this long in the salvage business by being easy to hit. "Extraction sequence initiated," Pulse announced as the airlock cycled. "Warning, hegemony vessels moving to intercept." Nova sprinted to the bridge, her mind already plotting escape vectors. As she strapped into the pilot's seat, she glanced back at the massive pod now secured in her cargo hold. The creature inside, Ranther, was fully awake now, those starlight eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "Well, partner," she said, firing up the Nightshade's engines, "let's show these hegemony dogs how we dance in the void." The ship broke away from the derelict just as more hegemony vessels emerged from hyperspace. Nova smiled grimly, her hands dancing across the controls. She hadn't spent years modifying the Nightshade for nothing. It was time to put those modifications to the test. As her ship accelerated into the debris field, Nova felt a strange sense of destiny. She didn't know why Ranther had been imprisoned, or what powers the ancient being possessed. But she knew one thing for certain, the galaxy was about to change, and she just lit the fuse. The Nightshade limped through the shadows of Europa Station's maintenance rings, trailing wisps of plasma from its damaged engines. Nova had managed to lose their hegemony pursuers 3 systems back, but the chase had taken its toll. More concerning was the failing power supply to Ranther's cryopod. They needed a proper facility to complete the awakening process, and soon. "Power levels at 12%, Pulse reported. Cryogenic stability failing. We have approximately 6 hours before complete system failure." Nova studied the massive space station looming before them. Europa Station was a hegemony stronghold, but it also housed one of the most advanced medical facilities in the sector. If they were going to save Ranther, they'd need the equipment inside. "Identity beacon modified," Pulse announced. "We are now registered as the Medical Transport Swift Mercy, clearance level beta." Nova adjusted her stolen medical uniform, checking the forged credentials one final time. "Any word from our contact?" Message received from Dr. Jean Zhao. "She's expecting us in Bay 17. The plan was risky. Dr. Zhao was part of an underground network of resistance sympathizers, but even she didn't know the full truth about their cargo. As far as she knew, they were smuggling stolen medical supplies. The docking procedure went smoother than Nova expected. Her forged credentials held up under scrutiny, and within an hour, they had transferred Ranther's pod to a secure medical bay deep within the station. Dr. Zhao was waiting for them, her dark eyes widening at the sight of their cargo. "By the void," she whispered, studying the readings from Ranther's pod. "This is no ordinary specimen. These neural patterns, they're more complex than anything I've ever seen." Nova watched as the doctor worked, her fingers flying over the medical controls. Through the pod's viewport, Ranther's eyes followed their every move. There was urgency there now, an almost desperate intensity. The pod's containment systems are integrated with his cybernetics, Dr. Zhao explained. It's not just keeping him in stasis, it's suppressing something. Some kind of energy signature I've never encountered before. Can you wake him safely? Yes, but... Dr. Zhao hesitated. Once we start the process, there's no going back. And Nova, whatever he is, he's powerful. The readings suggest capabilities far beyond anything in our databases. Nova met Ranther's glowing gaze. In those ancient eyes, she saw not just intelligence, but wisdom. Pain. Loneliness. Do it, she said firmly. The awakening process took hours. As Dr. Zhao carefully disconnected the suppression systems, the room's lights began to flicker. Energy readings spiked and fell in chaotic patterns. And through it all, Ranther remained perfectly still, those starlight eyes never leaving Nova's face. The first warning came from Pulse, transmitted directly to Nova's neural link. Hegemony security forces mobilizing. Our credentials have been flagged. Nova cursed. How long? 10 minutes until they reached this sector. Dr. Zhao worked faster, her hands steady despite the pressure. Almost there. The final suppressors are disengaging now. The pod's surface began to frost over, darkness spreading across its transparent surface like spilled ink. The medical bay's temperature plummeted, and Nova could see her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. Security forces entering the medical sector, Pulse updated. 5 minutes. The pod seals finally released with a hiss of escaping gas. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ranther moved. It was like watching a mountain come to life. The massive creature unfolded from the pod with fluid grace, its midnight blue fur rippling with patterns of starlight. The cybernetic augmentations hummed with power, silver circuits pulsing with energy that made Nova's skin tingle. Ranther stood nearly 3 meters tall, his bearing regal despite centuries of imprisonment. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate in Nova's very bones. "You have freed me," he said, each word carefully formed. "Why?" Before Nova could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. "Because everyone deserves to be free," she said quickly. "And right now, we need to move if we want to stay that way." Dr. Zhao pressed a data crystal into Nova's hand. "Security override codes. They'll get you to the emergency shuttles. Go." The first explosion rocked the medical bay as hegemony forces breached the outer doors. Nova drew her plasma pistol, but Ranther stepped forward, his massive form interposing itself between them and the entrance. "No," he rumbled. "Allow me to repay your courage." What happened next defied explanation. The patterns in Ranther's fur blazed with brilliant light, and the air itself seemed to twist around him. When the first hegemony troops burst through the door, they faced not just a massive ursine warrior, but something far more ancient and terrible. Ranther moved like liquid darkness, his augmented form displaying impossible speed and grace. Energy crackled around his claws as he tore through the soldiers' advanced armor like paper. Those who tried to flee found their paths blocked by shadows that moved against the light. "Time to go," Nova shouted, grabbing Dr. Zhao's arm. "Pulse, plot us an escape route." They ran through the station's corridors, Ranther flowing around them like a living shield. More security forces converged on their position, but none could stand against the awakened guardian. Nova caught glimpses of abilities that shouldn't have been possible. Gravity itself seemed to bend at Ranther's will, and the shadows responded to his commands like eager servants. They reached the emergency shuttle bay just as station security initiated lockdown procedures. Dr. Zhao quickly input the override codes, buying them precious minutes. "Come with us," Nova urged the doctor. Dr. Zhao shook her head. "I have other patients who need me. Other secrets to protect. Go." The shuttle's engines were already warming up as Nova and Ranther boarded. Through the viewport, they watched Dr. Zhao disappear into the station's depths, carrying her own quiet rebellion forward. As they broke away from Europa Station, alarms still blaring in their wake, Nova finally had a moment to process what she'd witnessed. She turned to find Ranther watching her, those impossible eyes now filled with something that might have been hope. "You took a great risk," he said softly. "For a stranger. For an unknown." Nova smiled, plotting a course back to where the Nightshade waited in the maintenance rings. "Sometimes the unknown is exactly what we need to change things. To make them right." Ranther's answering rumble might have been a laugh. "Perhaps," he said, "we were fated to meet, Nova Blackwood. There are more of my kind out there, sleeping in forgotten places. And now, at last, it is time for them to wake." 3 weeks after the Europa Station incident, the Nightshade docked at Shadow's Reach, a sprawling black market hub built into a hollowed-out asteroid. Nova had contacts here, people who specialized in staying invisible from hegemony eyes. They would need every advantage they could get, as the price on their heads grew with each passing day. Ranther had adapted quickly to life aboard the Nightshade, though the ship's corridors could barely contain his massive frame. More surprising was his gentle nature when not in combat. He spent hours in quiet meditation, the patterns in his fur flowing like distant nebulae as he communed with forces Nova could barely comprehend. "The marketplace is crowded today," Pulse reported as they made their way through Shadow's Reach's winding corridors. "Multiple hegemony informants detected. Exercise caution." Nova pulled her hood lower, conscious of the wanted notices floating on every public display. Beside her, Ranther had wrapped himself in a massive cloak that somehow seemed to bend light around him, making him appear as nothing more than a tall, broad-shouldered humanoid. Their destination was a data broker known as the Weaver, one of the few beings who might be able to help them locate more of Ranther's imprisoned kin. The Weaver's shop was tucked away in the asteroid's lower levels, accessible only through a maze of service tunnels. "Interesting companions you keep these days, Nova," a voice drawled from the shadows. Jasper Reed stepped into view, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly in the dim light. The mercenary's hand rested casually on his pulse rifle. "Not now, Jasper," Nova warned. "We're here on business." "Business?" Jasper laughed. "The hegemony's offering enough credits to buy a small moon for information about you and your friend there. That's the kind of business that interests me." Before Nova could react, the shadows around them deepened. Ranther's cloak fell away, revealing his true form. The patterns in his fur blazed with cold fire, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made Jasper's cybernetics crackle with interference. "Choose carefully, little one," Ranther rumbled. "Your next action will determine far more than just today's profit." Jasper's cybernetic eye whirred as it tried to process what he was seeing. His hand trembled on his weapon. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. "The stories are true then," he whispered. "The guardian bears of the third sphere. They said you could bend reality itself." Nova blinked in surprise. "You know about his kind?" Jasper nodded slowly. "My grandmother was a keeper of the old stories. Tales of beings who walked between stars before humans learned to make fire. The hegemony tried to erase those stories, but some of us remembered." Ranther studied the mercenary with newfound interest. "Your grandmother was wise to keep the knowledge alive. Tell me, child of the storytellers, do you know of others like me?" "Rumors," Jasper admitted. "Whispers of secret hegemony facilities. But I know someone who might know more." He hesitated. "If you're willing to trust me, I can take you to them." Nova's hand hadn't left her plasma pistol. "Why help us now?" "Because grandmother always said that when the Guardians returned, it would mark the beginning of great change." Jasper's organic eye gleamed with something like wonder. "And I want to be on the right side of that change." The journey deeper into Shadow's Reach was tense but uneventful. Jasper led them through maintenance shafts and forgotten corridors until they reached a section of the asteroid that didn't appear on any official maps. Here, they found not the Weaver, but something far more valuable, a hidden enclave of resistance fighters led by Commander Lyra Stone, a former hegemony officer who had discovered the truth about the Guardians and chosen to defect. "We've been watching you since Europa Station," Lyra explained, showing them a holographic map of known hegemony black sites. "What you did there gave us an opportunity we've been waiting for." The map highlighted several locations across the galaxy, places where energy signatures matched those from Ranther's pod. Other Guardians, sleeping away the centuries in secret prisons. "The hegemony found them one by one," Lyra continued. "Used their technology to keep them dormant while trying to unlock their secrets. But they never fully understood what they were dealing with." Ranther moved through the hologram, his fur rippling with complex patterns as he studied each location. "My brothers and sisters," he said softly. "I feel their dreams, even now. They wait in darkness, as I did." "The nearest facility is on Thanatos 7, Lyra said. "A secret research base built into the planet's northern ice cap. Security is heavy, but with your abilities and our intel, we might have a chance." Nova felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, the same feeling she'd had when she first found Ranther's pod. "So we're really doing this? Taking on the entire hegemony?" "They built their empire on stolen power," Ranther rumbled, his eyes blazing like captured stars. "It is time they learned the cost of such theft." Jasper stepped forward, checking his weapons. "My grandmother would never forgive me if I missed this. Count me in." As they began planning the assault on Thanatos 7, Nova caught glimpses of ancient knowledge in Ranther's eyes. The Guardians were more than just powerful beings, they were custodians of forces the hegemony could barely comprehend. Their awakening would change not just the balance of power, but the very nature of what humans thought possible. "They'll be expecting us now," Lyra warned. "After Europa Station, they'll have doubled their security, maybe worse." Nova smiled, feeling Ranther's quiet confidence flowing through their newfound bond. "Good," she said. "That means they're afraid. And fear makes emperors do foolish things." As the resistance fighters gathered their resources and prepared for the mission ahead, Nova realized that her simple life as a salvage pilot was well and truly over. She had become part of something larger, a revolution that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. And watching Ranther commune with the strange energies that flowed through Shadow's Reach, she knew they were only beginning to understand the true scope of what they had set in motion. The hunt for the other Guardians would take them into the heart of hegemony space, challenging everything they thought they knew about the universe and their place in it. The time for hiding was over. The time for awakening had begun. The assault on Thanatos 7 had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but the cost had been high. The Nightshade now carried not just Nova's original crew, but 3 more awakened Guardians, and the terrible knowledge they had discovered in the facility's ancient data cores. Ranther stood in the ship's cargo hold with his newly freed kin, Lyra, a silver-furred Guardian whose patterns shifted like flowing mercury, Talon, whose dark red fur crackled with barely contained energy, and Spectra, whose white fur seemed to bend light itself around her massive form. They communicated in low harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate sympathetically. Nova studied the holographic data they'd recovered, her expression grim. "So the hegemony didn't just find you by accident. They were following a map left by the architects." "The ones you call architects," Spectra's voice was like crystal wind chimes, "were not our creators, but our jailers. They feared what we represented, the true potential of consciousness unbound by physical laws." Jasper, nursing a plasma burn from their escape, leaned forward with interest. "The stories my grandmother told, they said the Guardians were born from the dreams of dying stars." "Poetic, but not inaccurate," Ranther rumbled. "We are children of the void itself, manifestations of universe's desire to understand itself. The architects sought to control that understanding, to channel it into forms they could comprehend and contain. Commander Stone's resistance fleet paralleled their course through hyperspace, their ships carrying more freed prisoners and recovered data. The hegemony's pursuit had been fierce, but the combined powers of 3 awakened guardians had proved too much for even their most advanced weaponry. The facility's records went back thousands of years, Nova said, bringing up another holographic display. They show the architects seeding guardian pods throughout the galaxy, using them as anchor points for some kind of massive energy network. The network of binding, Talon's voice crackled like distant thunder. A web of consciousness-suppressing technology that spans the galaxy. Through it, they hope to tame the very forces of creation. Lyra moved through the hologram, her mercury fur flowing like quicksilver. But the architects miscalculated. In their arrogance, they believed they could control the fundamental forces of reality. Instead, they doomed themselves. The holograms shifted, showing the fall of the architect civilization, a cascade of reality-warping disasters as their control over the Guardians began to fail. In their desperation, they had encoded their consciousness into machines, becoming the first artificial beings. The hegemony, Nova breathed, the pieces finally falling into place. They're not just using architect technology. They are the architects. What remains of them, Ranther confirmed. Echoes of consciousness trapped in endless cycles of recursive code, still seeking to control what cannot be controlled. Pulsa's avatar flickered to life. Incoming transmission from Commander Stone. They've decoded more of the facility's data. There's another site, bigger than anything we've seen before. The hologram shifted to show a massive space station hidden in the heart of a dark nebula. Unlike the brutal efficiency of hegemony architecture, this structure was old, its design an organic fusion of technology and artistry that predated human civilization. The cradle, Spectra whispered, her fur brightening. The place of our first imprisonment. Where the network of binding was born. And where it can be undone, Talon added, energy crackling between his claws. If we can reach the control nexus, we can free all our remaining kin at once. Nova studied the station's defenses. The hegemony had built layers of protection around the ancient structure, including temporal distortion fields and reality anchors designed specifically to contain Guardian powers. It's a fortress, Jasper observed. The heart of their power. They'll have their entire fleet protecting it. Then we'll need a bigger fleet, Commander Stone's hologram flickered to life. I've contacted every resistance cell in the sector. They're ready to move on your word. Ranther turned to Nova, his starlight eyes holding a depth of emotion she was only beginning to understand. You freed me knowing nothing of what I was, asking nothing in return. Now I must ask everything of you. Will you help us end this cycle of imprisonment? Nova looked around at her expanded crew, Jasper checking his weapons, Commander Stone's hologram awaiting her response, the 4 Guardians with their cosmic powers barely contained by physical form. She thought of Dr. Zhao back on Europa Station, still fighting her quiet battle, and all the others who had helped them reach this point. The hegemony built their power on lies and stolen strength, she said finally. It's time to show them what real power looks like, the kind that comes from choosing to fight for something bigger than yourself. The Guardian's fur rippled with approval, their patterns synchronizing in a display that made the very air shimmer with potential. The Nightshade's engines hummed as Pulse plotted their course to the dark nebula. Besides, Nova added with a grin, I've always wanted to help overthrow an ancient civilization of machine gods. Sounds like fun. As they prepared for the final battle, Nova felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever waited for them at the cradle, she knew they were on the right side of history. The time of chains, physical and metaphysical, was ending. The revolution was about to evolve into something far greater than mere political change. It was about to become a revolution of reality itself. The battle for the cradle began in fire and ended in light. The resistance fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, hundreds of ships strong, their crews united in purpose. The hegemony's defense fleet responded instantly, their weapons powered by technology stolen from the architects themselves. But they hadn't counted on the Guardians. The Nightshade led the charge, its hull now enhanced by the same cosmic energies that flowed through its unusual passengers. Nova piloted with intuitive grace, the ship responding to her thoughts as much as her commands. Behind her, the 4 Guardians stood in a circle, their fur blazing with patterns that warped the fabric of spacetime itself. Reality anchors detected, Pulse reported. The hegemony is attempting to suppress Guardian abilities. Let them try, Talon growled, his red fur crackling with barely contained power. The other Guardians rumbled in agreement, their combined energies creating a field that turned enemy weapons back upon themselves. The Resistance fleet engaged the hegemony ships while Nova piloted the Nightshade through the chaos, heading for the station's main docking ring. Commander Stone's vessels provided covering fire, their crews fighting with the desperate courage of those who knew they were making history. Multiple contacts. Jasper called from the weapons station. They're launching boarding pods. The first wave of hegemony troops that breached the Nightshade's hull met Spectra's power. The white-furred Guardian bent light around them, creating mirrors of confusion that had heavily armed soldiers firing at their own reflections. Those who made it past her met Lyra's quicksilver fury, their advanced armor dissolving under her touch. Nova fought her way to the bridge, Ranther at her side. The massive Guardian moved like living shadow, his powers grown stronger in the presence of his kin. Together, they fought through waves of security forces, pushing ever closer to the heart of the ancient station. The network nexus is ahead, Ranther rumbled, his starlight eyes fixed on something only he could see. I can feel the chains that bind our brothers and sisters. They reached the central chamber just as Commander Stone's forces engaged the station's main defense grid. The room was a marvel of architect engineering, with crystalline structures that pulsed with captive starlight. At its center stood a figure that was neither human nor machine, an architect consciousness given physical form. Fascinating, the being's voice resonated on multiple frequencies. You actually believe you can undo the work of eons. The network of binding maintains the very stability of this galaxy. Without it, chaos will reign. You mistake control for stability, Ranther answered, the patterns in his fur flowing like constellations. The universe seeks balance, not bondage. The architect laughed, the sound like grinding crystals. Balance? We built empires that spanned galaxies while your kind dreamed in the void. We mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself. And look what it got you, Nova said, her plasma pistol aimed steady. Trapped in machines, desperately clinging to power you never truly understood. The chamber erupted in combat unlike anything Nova had ever seen. The architect commanded powers that bent space and time, but the Guardians moved through reality like it was water, their combined abilities creating effects that defied comprehension. Jasper and Nova provided covering fire as Ranther and his kin pushed toward the central control nexus. Throughout the station, resistance forces clashed with hegemony troops, their battles illuminated by the cosmic energies being unleashed. The network is destabilizing. Pulse warned. Quantum fluctuations detected throughout the sector. Nova saw the change rippling through space like waves on a pond. Everywhere the network's influence weakened, reality seemed to become more real. Colors grew deeper, sounds more resonant, as if the universe was awakening from a long sleep. The architect made its final stand at the nexus itself, its form shifting between states of matter as it wielded powers meant to cage gods. But against 4 awakened Guardians fighting in perfect harmony, even such strength was not enough. Ranther's claws, wreathed in cosmic fire, struck the killing blow. The architect's form dissolved into streams of data, its consciousness fragmenting across the void it had once sought to control. Now, Ranther commanded. The Guardians linked their powers, connecting to the ancient machinery that had kept their kind imprisoned for so long. Through their connection, Nova felt echoes of other minds awakening across the galaxy, dozens, then hundreds of guardians breaking free from their ancient bonds. The network of binding unraveled like a tapestry caught in stellar winds. Reality rippled and reformed, not into chaos as the architects had feared, but into something richer and stranger. The hegemony's fleet, cut off from the source of their stolen power, began to fail. "It's done," Spectra announced, her white fur shimmering with triumphant light. "The chains are broken." In the aftermath, as Resistance ships secured the station and celebrated their victory, Nova stood with Ranther in the Nightshade's observation deck. They watched the nebula shifting with new colors that human eyes had never seen before, proof that the universe was already changing. "What happens now?" she asked. "With all of you awake, with reality itself transformed?" Ranther's fur rippled thoughtfully. "Now we do what we were meant to do, not rule or control, but guide. Help all sentient beings understand their place in a universe far more wonderful and strange than they imagined." And the hegemony? Their power was built on stolen dreams and borrowed strength, the Guardian rumbled. Without the network, they are simply another civilization that must learn to live in harmony with the cosmos. Nova smiled, feeling the Nightshade's engines humming beneath her feet. The ship seemed eager to explore this transformed galaxy, to see what other wonders waited in the void. "Well," she said, "they're going to need help with that. Someone to show them how to live free." Ranther's answering rumble might have been a laugh. "Indeed. And who better than the one who taught a Guardian to trust again?" As the Resistance fleet prepared to secure the sector, Nova plotted their next course. There would be more battles ahead, the hegemony wouldn't fall in a day, but the tide had turned. A new age was dawning, one where the boundaries between possible and impossible had become wonderfully, terrifyingly fluid. The salvage pilot who had once hunted forgotten treasures in the void now flew toward a future where reality itself was the greatest adventure of all. And at her side stood a being who had waited centuries to see the stars dance free once more. The revolution was complete. The awakening had begun.